It was narrated from Amra that she heard Aisha say when she was mentioning what kind of breastfeeding makes a person a mahram. 10 definite breastfeedings were revealed in the Quran, then 5 definite breastfeedings were revealed too. So Allah revealed 2 Quran verses about breastfeeding adults. But you can read the Quran we have today until your brain falls out and you won't find either of these verses. Well, Aisha tells us what happened. It was narrated that Aisha said, "The verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me under my pillow. When the Messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came in and ate it." So we can only conclude that both verses on breastfeeding adults were eaten by Aisha's sheep. Now, was this a mere accident, or was there something more sinister afoot? Let's see if we can solve the mystery of the missing verses. The case begins with a woman named Sahla. Sahih Muslim, 3600. It was narrated that Aisha said, "Sahla bint Suhail came to the Prophet and said, 'O Messenger of Allah, I see signs of displeasure on the face of Abu Hudayfa,'" that was her husband, "when Salim, who was his ally, comes in." The Prophet said, "Breastfeed him." She said, "How can I breastfeed him? He is a grown man." The Messenger of Allah smiled and said, "I know that he is a grown man." Creepiest smile ever. So Sahla's husband was concerned about this grown man being around his wife, and Muhammad's response was that she needed to put her breasts in the man's mouth repeatedly. Interestingly, Sahla did exactly what Muhammad and Allah commanded. She put her breasts in Salim's mouth so that he could suck on them over and over again. And this calmed her husband down. Why? Because he trusted Muhammad. "Well, Muhammad and Allah say that if I just let this man suck on my wife's breast a bunch of times, I don't need to worry about what they do when I'm gone for the weekend. I feel so much better now that her nipples are in this guy's mouth. Anyone else want to hang out with my wife while I'm out of town? Come on over. Breasts for everyone, Allahu Akbar." For a while at least, Muhammad's wives were on board with Allah's views on breastfeeding adults. When Muhammad's wife Hafsa wanted to spend time with a man, she would send the man to her sister to be breastfed. We read in Malik's Muwatta, chapter 30, section 1, number 8. Hafsa, al-Mu'mineen, mother of the believers, sent Asim ibn Abdullah ibn Sa'd to her sister Fatima bint Umar ibn al-Khattab for her to suckle him 10 times so that he could come in to see her. She did it so he used to come in to see her. Hafsa couldn't breastfeed Asim because she didn't have children, so she had her sister breastfeed him 10 times, which transformed him into Hafsa's foster nephew. Eventually, however, most of Muhammad's wives, including Hafsa, became disgruntled over the practice. After retelling the story about Muhammad ordering Abu Hudayfa's wife to breastfeed a grown man, Malik's Muwatta, chapter 30, section 2, number 12, continues with this. Aisha, al-Mu'mineen, mother of the believers, took that as a precedent for whatever men she wanted to be able to come to see her. She ordered her sister, Kulthum bint Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, and the daughters of her brother to give milk to whichever men she wanted to be able to come in to see her. The rest of the wives of the Prophet refused to let anyone come into them by such nursing. They said, "No, by Allah, we think that what the Messenger of Allah ordered Sahla bint Suhail to do was only by an indulgence concerning the nursing of Salim alone. No, by Allah, no one will come in upon us by such nursing." We find the same thing in Sahih Muslim, 3605, where Muhammad's wife, Salama, declares, "The other wives of the Prophet used to refuse to admit anyone on the basis of that breastfeeding of a grown-up. They said to Aisha, 'By Allah, we think that this is a concession which the Messenger of Allah granted only in the case of Salim. No one will enter upon us or see us on the basis of this type of breastfeeding.'" So Muhammad's wives were claiming that the command to breastfeed adults only applied to Abu Hudayfa's wife in the case of Salim. This explanation obviously doesn't work for 3 reasons. 1, there were 2 Quran verses about breastfeeding adults. Whichever verse was meant for Abu Hudayfa's wife, what was the other verse for? 2, we know that Abu Hudayfa's wife was told to breastfeed Salim 5 times. So the situation with Abu Hudayfa arose after the verse requiring 10 breastfeedings had been abrogated. The verse requiring 10 breastfeedings therefore couldn't have been revealed about Abu Hudayfa's wife. 3, as we've seen, Muhammad's wife Hafsa had her sister breastfeed a man 10 times, which means that this was already being practiced before Abu Hudayfa became concerned about his wife and Salim. So there's no way the commands to breastfeed adults only applied in one specific case, and Muhammad's wives knew this. And yet they used their glaringly false interpretation to reject the practice. Apparently, Muhammad's wives had more common sense than their husband and their God. They realized how silly it was for grown women to put their bare breasts into the mouths of grown men in an attempt to avoid sexual tension. They understood that it was absolutely ludicrous for Aisha to keep sending men to suck on her sister's and niece's breasts whenever she wanted to be alone with the men. And surprise, surprise, the verses commanding this practice, a practice Muhammad's wives found revolting, came up missing after he died. Someone conveniently left the sheep gate open. There are only two real possibilities here. Either Aisha remained faithful in her desire to preserve the Quran, and Muhammad's other wives conspired to send hungry sheep into Aisha's house to rid the world of one of history's most ridiculous teachings. Or, since Aisha had the only written copy of the verses, Muhammad's other wives may have eventually persuaded her to destroy them. I favor the latter explanation. While it's clear that Aisha initially approved of Allah's command to breastfeed adults, she was also very young and under the influence of Muhammad. When Muhammad died, Aisha was 18 years old, and by this time she had presumably learned that if a woman wants to avoid sexual tension, it's a good idea to keep her breasts out of men's mouths. But there's another piece of evidence that supports Aisha's involvement in the Sheepgate conspiracy. The sheep didn't just eat the Quran verses on breastfeeding adults. It also ate the Quran verse on stoning adulteresses. Aisha was once accused of adultery, and if Muhammad hadn't received a special revelation proclaiming her innocence, she could have been stoned to death. The accusation of adultery was one of the reasons she became so careful about having her sister and nieces help her follow the breastfeeding rule. She was trying to protect herself. We don't need Sherlock Holmes to uncover Aisha's fear of the verse of stoning. And her sheep ate the only copy. Coincidence? No. Conspiracy. The verses on breastfeeding an adult, along with the verse of stoning, fell victim to one of history's least common means of malice: death by sheep. For you Muslims who are watching, here are 10 takeaways. First, Muhammad's wives knew more about human nature than Allah did. So Muhammad's wives were greater in knowledge than Allah. Second, in the Quran, Surah 15, verse 9, Allah promises to protect the Quran from corruption. And yet Muhammad's wives were able to destroy verses of the Quran. So Muhammad's wives were greater in power than Allah. So was the sheep. Your God couldn't protect the Quran from a sheep. Third, Muhammad's wives had the courage to remove this awful teaching from the Quran. So they were greater in goodness than Allah. Question: if Muhammad's wives were greater in knowledge, power, and goodness than Allah, why are you worshiping Allah? Fourth, if Muhammad's wives were willing to deliberately destroy verses of the Quran, it seems that they may have recognized that they were married to a false prophet. Unfortunately for them, since the penalty for leaving Islam is death, they had to keep quiet about their apostasy. Seventh, the Quran you read today is different from the eternal Quran. Which one's better? Eighth, your Muslim leaders tell you that the Quran has been perfectly preserved, even though they've read the same sources I keep quoting to you. Your leaders know that, according to your most trusted sources, entire chapters of the Quran were lost. Large passages of the Quran were lost. Verses were lost. Phrases were lost. And yet they tell you that the Quran has been perfectly preserved right down to the letter from the time it was revealed to Muhammad. Ninth, if your leaders keep lying to you about the history of the Quran, what else are they lying to you about?